the button in my hand, the one from the Looney Tunes where, was it the Roadrunner? Where's the wolf? Either one. Hold that button and just by pressing it, just blow shit up. And so I knew I had that. I knew I had that power in my hand, but I didn't use it because I knew that once I did it, the aftermath would mean loss of family, loss of home, possible loss of children. But the benefit outweighed the risk at a certain point. And so last night, kind of going off on a bit of a philosophical tangent, I grabbed a book off the shelf, and it is called The Copernican Revolution by Thomas Kuhn. And I grabbed it because I was thinking about change and how I went through that change and how it took so long to finally pull the trigger. It's a bad use of words. But it took so long because I was gathering information. I knew that what I had was quote unquote normal. It was something the children needed. It was something that was looked at from the outside as normal. And I knew that paradigm, that sphere of life was valued. It's valued. And it was valued by the people around me and the important people that supported us in the family. But I also knew that there was too much shit that was, piercing that bubble. That bubble was fucking Swiss cheese by the time shit went down. So I'm standing here in this crumbling home, this crumbling relationship with the button in my hand. And so Thomas Kuhn, he was the father of the philosophy of scientific revolution. And so he said that progress undergoes periodic revolutions, and efforts may generate insoluble theoretical problems or experimental anomalies that expose a paradigm's inadequacies or contradict it altogether. The accumulation of difficulties triggers a crisis that can only be resolved by an intellectual revolution that replaces an old paradigm with a new one. And so that's a note that I took. I didn't just say that off the top of my head. I am not that sharp, especially after a glass of wine. But those words that can be applied to the situation. So efforts may generate insoluble theoretical problems or experimental anomalies, meaning that things that used to add up no longer add up anymore. And so when you're experimenting with love, say, or with caregiving, or I don't know, it's hard to put these things into emotional words because they sort of lose their power. But I argue that they don't. But I know it comes off like that. But in a situation where for me, personally, I was up all night, sick with a child, awake all night. And in my mind, I knew that someone who valued me and loved me and was concerned with my health might have come downstairs and checked on me and the child, but that wasn't happening. So that was going against the theory that, love includes this level of caregiving, which wasn't happening. And so, that's just one little bit. That's one little bit that was an experimental anomaly, let's say. And so if you add up all those experimental anomalies over time, and you would hate to think that your relationship is looked at as a scientific experiment, but if you're going through hard stuff and you're wondering if you need to make a change, you are going through those theoretical exercises. You just don't know it. And so I'm looking back on it now, knowing that I was. Because of Thomas Kuhn and because of my study of philosophy in college. I thank goodness for that. And so the accumulation of difficulties triggers a crisis that can only be resolved by an intellectual revolution that replaces an old paradigm with a new one. And that could be, in any relationship, that could be a mini paradigm shift. It could be, you know what? We've been running on this philosophy that you, the man, should be taking out the garbage every night, and I, the female, should be washing dishes. And you know what? That paradigm, that just doesn't work for me anymore. So we come to this crisis where now we're like at each other's throats. Why do I have to fucking take out the garbage? I don't know. Why do I have to fucking do the dishes? You know, what is this with these gender roles that we don't agree with and they're not working for a relationship? All right, that's the crisis that's triggered. And the intellectual revolution that replaces that paradigm comes from conversation, which I guess you could say is the mini shift. So that small little bit, that pixel in the larger picture, can be solved with a small paradigm shift. But I'm not talking about a small one. I'm talking about a big one. And so if a lot of those like small things can't be resolved and they add up and they trigger the larger shift, then that's what I'm speaking about in with my personal story. All right, train of thought. All right, train. Get back on that train. Oh, I don't know what I was saying. Thomas Kuhn. He's a cool dude. I would look him up if I were you. But I'm not you and you're not me, and I'm a philosophy nerd. So there's that. So anyway, my shift was a long time coming. And it was not easy. And I guess I need to sort of focus where I want to go with this talk, this podcast. And not give you so much detail that it becomes just too diluted. But the shift for me, I was talking about holding that button. What do you call it? It's like that box with a little lever that goes down and it says TNT on it. Anyway, that was in my hand. I wish I had a better metaphor for that right now, because this one's failing me big time. And I don't want to use a gun as an image. But maybe I will. I just will. So, I had my finger on the trigger and could pull it whenever I felt it was time. And knowing that power was in my hands was not a good thing. It wasn't a satisfying thing. It was an absolutely tough, very difficult. It was a really difficult responsibility on my shoulders, because once I pulled that trigger, everything changed for everybody. And that's not a fun place to be. But in my heart and in my mind and in my soul and for my children, I had to do this. And so what ended up happening, without too much detail yet, was I told the bank that we were no longer attempting to pay the mortgage anymore. And that the years of paperwork and phone calls and meetings in order to refinance and go through loss mitigation and to just stay in this house that we couldn't keep up anymore, because we had so much tax debt and credit card debt, but yet we had a couple AK-47s and all the other stuff I described. I had to get on the phone with them and say, you can take our house. I am ready to give it up. I can't do it anymore. And I couldn't manage that mental load of trying to keep the roof over our heads. And we were too upside down financially. And so I stopped answering the phone, because the calls kept coming. The calls kept coming and saying, your house is going into foreclosure, and I don't even remember. I just stopped answering them. Because you can start the process of foreclosure, but the calls still keep coming in, and the bills still keep coming in the mail showing you what you owe. And I watch the bills come in and the number go up and up and up past 10 grand, 11 grand. There was a VHFA representative who would come to the house every month. He became my friend. He would come and knock on the door and make sure that we hadn't vacated without letting them know. I'd be like, no, still here in this palace that we live in. And I had to go through this process without telling anybody, because you don't tell anybody. That's embarrassing. But in all honesty, there's nothing to hide in that situation. I did all I could, and the house, it wasn't worth saving. Let's say that. In the end, I was in the house by myself with the kids, and we had a really bad rainstorm, and the water came into the wall, and it finally opened up the wall, a crack, and the seam of the molding started dripping down the wall, and water had run through the ceiling to the light fixture, and it started growing black mold, and the living room was unusable. So I had to move the kids into another room in the house, and we made that our living room, and we lived there. And the heat didn't work in that room. So by the time we got to October, November, we had no heat in the rooms that we were staying in, because the room that just got taken over by black mold had the wood stove, and we couldn't be down there anymore. It was a wreck. And so my last couple of weeks in that house, I had to sit with my decision of having pulled that trigger and having let that house go and having blown up the relationship so we could get out of this awful situation and hopefully move on to something better. And luckily we did. Right now I'm in a totally different place. But my success now was informed by what happened in those moments. And I will never, ever, ever forget what I had to do to make those changes. And I guess what I want to tell you, those who are listening, when you need to make a big change, and I'm not going to, I don't know what you're going through, and you can tell me. I love to listen to people's stories, and I love to help. And I think people know that naturally about me, because I do get phone calls and people who know that I'm willing to listen. And I'm in no place to judge. So I get that going for me. And you have that in me as a non-judgmental person. So those tough times informed where I am today. And today, being accepted into the Vermont Leadership Program, producing a concert series for the third year in a row, and being confident and a change maker, and showing my children that life is what you make it. And that's the God's honest truth. But, saying that life is what you make it, it's also a combination of putting the right people in your army, so to speak. And if anything has saved me from total destruction over my lifetime,